In this video, we'll be discussing about one of the important concept in any JavaScript based or TypeScript programming language, that is functions. As you already know that JavaScript is a purely functional programming language. So how different are functions in JavaScript and the power of JavaScript functions and how you are going to deal with functions mainly in JavaScript or TypeScript are totally different when you compare with other programming languages like C, C++, Java, Python, something like that. Because JavaScript being a purely functional programming language, and also in JavaScript functions, when I talk about JavaScript, always remember that TypeScript is ultimately being converted to JavaScript itself. So you don't, whatever features of JavaScript are present, as if we already discussed that the runtime behavior of TypeScript is never going to change. So but understanding the functions in TypeScript is almost equal to the understanding the functions in JavaScript. And in JavaScript, functions are first class variables. It means that a function can be passed as an argument, a function can be assigned to a variable, a function definition can be assigned to a variable, and later we can invoke that function using that variable. So there are different ways or unique ways to deal with functions in TypeScript or JavaScript, right? So let's see different features of TypeScript or different features of the functions in TypeScript in this video. So first we'll discuss about functions, then how to write function types, what is the significance of it, how you can write different types of function types. So even in writing the function types, you have different versions in it. And then we'll discuss about optional parameters, how you can deal with them, and what are the things which you need to keep in mind while you are writing optional parameter functions. I mean functions which take optional parameters. In the same way, functions which take default parameters, what is default parameters, what it mean to say that it has a default parameter, right? And then we'll understand about REST parameters. So what is the way you want to define a function which can take infinite number of arguments. So you cannot keep on changing your function, right? Today your function might take one, tomorrow your function might take two arguments. So you can write a function in JavaScript or TypeScript that takes infinite number of arguments, right? And last, it is also one of the most important concept in any place: function overloading or overriding, right? So basically it means that you can write the same function name, the same function definition, or the function definitions can be different with the same function name. So we'll see all of these features in detail by writing down the code and understanding them in clear. Okay, so let's move on to our code right now. Yes, so let me create a new file, function.ts, right? So you know the function basic, right? So this function is gonna just do console.log hello world. So this is the basic function which you know, right? So it is taking 0 arguments and it's returning nothing. So how do you write function type for such thing? So if I take a comma b and then return a plus b, right? Right, and then sum of two values, whatever it is. So basically I followed camel casing, sum of two values, right? And you can define another function which takes 3 arguments. But yeah, ultimately this is how you define a function, and then you are specifying the type to it, right? Number, and return type is going to be another number, right? And there can be a function which takes callback or callback function, right? So it means, in JavaScript, as I said, functions can take another function. So functions can be passed as an argument to another function can be assigned to another some function can be assigned to a variable. So all of these are possible, right? So callback is a function this is going to return void, and this is going to take one or two parameters. I'll name them I comma j, right? So here if a percentage 2 is equal to 0, then call back. So I'm calling this function 0 comma 1, whatever it is, right? So these are the different types. One function which returns nothing, the other function which takes two arguments and returns some value, and there is another function which takes another function as an argument. So this callback function takes another function as an argument and calls that when some condition is satisfied, right? So how do you write function types for each of this? That is going to be interesting, right? Let's look into that. So first way, the simple way, you define a function. So I'm writing type for it. Let me write on the top, type basic is equal to, right? It's going to return void and it's going to take nothing. So this is the type which is going, bound to this function. So now if I convert basic variable is equal to function console.log, right? Hello world, right? So basically I'm defining a variable. Now what type is this? This is holding a function itself in its value, right? So you can assign this type basic, and now if you try to return something, a plus, try to return something, yes. Now see, the type basic is basically assigned to do that. The function is going to return a void value, but when you assign this like this, it is called as anonymous function, because this function doesn't have any reference. So if in JavaScript you can write this one functions in this fashion as well. So these functions are called as an anonymous function, which means it doesn't have any name to it. So here like this, so this function is stored over here. Now if I call basic variable and console.log, right, console.log ts node function.ts, so it is saying implicitly has any, let me comment it down, yes, right. So I have defined a type and now assigned it to this function, right? Right. So this didn't give me any error technically. You might be wondering why. Because when you have typed this, the function basic as in this way, the problem is that, right, void basically ignores whatever you are trying to return. Now let me, so when you type return void is there, then your TypeScript basically ignores whatever you are trying to return. It is totally ignored. So see here, the function type is being treated as void, but you are returning something, right? Now what if I try to change it in this fashion? So I'm saying that my function is going to return a value which is of type string. Now here I started getting the compile time errors saying that return type number is not assignable to types basic, type number is not assignable to type string, because here I'm trying to return a number instead of string, whereas my type which I have defined and assigned to the basic variable is of different type. Similarly, if I have to if I have to write a type definition for here, let me change it back to number, right? Type definition over here for the sum of two values, type sum of two values is equal to, right, a number, b number and returns another number, right? So now again I'm converting it into first class function wherein I'll store the function in a variable, right? And I'll assign this type as sum of two values, right? And now when I execute this function sum of two values, so see both of these are actually same values, but it is not throwing error because this is a type and this is a variable. So TypeScript differentiates. So TypeScript is intelligent enough to differentiate what is a type and what is a variable, right? And it automatically started giving us errors. See, now you don't have to define it here what A is, what B is. Now 1 comma 2, when I do this I get 3. So previously you guys, everybody used to define that this is a number over here and this is B, and we used to type the return type. But this might become very clumsy when you want to define a very complicated function which is going to take a type of object wherein you have to define that bigger one, and it is calling another callback function, or it is returning another callback function. All of these cases, right? Then it becomes really troublesome. So what it is recommended is to define the types in a separate file. So basically we define all the types in a separate file so that they can be exported. So I can simply export this type from my other file, right? So export, let me write a file for that, types.ts, right? Export, this is how you write your code, export, and now I can import it. So see, I can import it. So this is how you generally write your code. Right now, if I want to write a call type for this callback function, how do I do that? Export type callback fn is equal to, first it is going to take an argument of name A and of type string. Then it is going to take another function of name callback, and this is going to be of type I string, j string, and this is going to return me void. What is that? It is going to return me void. So now this long, so it is a simple function basically, but even then the type definition has been pretty large, right? Now I will simply, instead of doing all of these, what I'll do is I'll simply assign it over here, and my entire function is now typed. So it gives me error. See here it says A is string because we have typed it as string instead of ember, and we try to divide it by 2, then automatically it is giving me an error. So this looks a lot cleaner code for me, rather than defining the functions or rather than defining the types and everything over here, because it was very clumsy for me. And you don't need to do this anyhow now, because you already defined that in a separate file, right? And it also says that callback function is of type string and you are trying to send a number. So I'm just converting it into a number. So this is how you write types of a function. And trust me, if a function's definition or the complexity of the function will be really dependent on what exactly it is doing and what parameters it is taking. So it is not recommended to define all the typed values over there itself, because it makes your code very unreadable and not good to eye, and you start very difficult to debug bugs, right? In the same way, in JavaScript, there is other way of writing functions. Or what JavaScript actually does is you can define a function with not just which is a callable function. It means obviously you write a function so that you can call it later, but the additional power inside JavaScript is that you can define a function which can have some properties associated with it. Like example, this callback function, right? This callback function here, I have defined an inline thing, but I can do like this as well. Callback Okay, I don't know, I don't want to export it. Type callback is equal to, okay, description, this is of type string, and void. So this is other way where I can define about a function, string j string, and now I can simply say callback. So this callback refers to this function. What it means is that this callback is a function which takes both string as an argument and returns of type void. See the syntactical difference, right? This I have defined as an object and this as an inline statement. Here the function not just is callable, but also it has some properties associated with it, like this. I can say parent of function. So here I can say string. So I can store some information in that function. So this function is not only just callable, but also this function has some properties, description. So see, this automatically it came for suggestion callback dot what it is parent of function. So what I'm trying to say here is that in JavaScript a function, so let me write it down. In JavaScript a function is not only just callable but also can store additional properties which can be used later on, like this. So I am storing this callback function. This callback function is not just only a function which is taking two arguments, string of type string and returning void, but also it has some additional properties like description and parent of function, right? So this is one important thing while you are defining function, right? And in JavaScript functions can also be invoked, or I would say functions can be invoked in two ways. One, with a new keyword, right? So in JavaScript functions can be invoked in two ways. One, by calling it using parenthesis, right? Second, using new keyword, right? So how to what I meant to say here is that you can call the same function using two different syntaxes like this. Type another callback is equal to, you can write it this way. Okay, this is going to take a string, and you can call the same function using this way. And here number, or I can say string. So now this another callback function, let me define, or super function, I'll name it as super function, right? And I'll export it. I'll define the function body of superscript, super function. Super function is equal to, right? The super function can be invoked in two ways. It says that void is not assignable, so void basically I have to return to something. So it says that return some string. What did we define actually? Yes, it takes two arguments, a comma b, and it is going to return some value. But what error it is saying? super function provides no match for the signature new a string number. So what it's saying is that you have defined a type which is not matching with the defined signature. So what it is saying is that this type of call is not possible, and right. So again it is saying not assignable to type super function, provides no match for signature new, right? So what is this error? First let's understand that error. Like this, a function can be called in two different ways, right? But currently it is throwing an error, right? So the reason is that when you define another function and you assign this super function over here, right? Now this super function can be invoked this way, 10, this is also fine, and the same function can be invoked this way. So see, both of these are possible. Now both have been typed to the same type, like this can return string and this can return number. So what I'm trying to say here is that the same function can be invoked in two different ways, because when you try to invoke with the new, it creates a new object for ourselves in the JavaScript ecosystem, right? So these are the different types and different ways to declare types and assign properties and assign their function body, what parameters they are going to take, what they are going to return in JavaScript, right? Next we'll move on to another concept called as optional parameters. Okay, so first thing, optional parameters, right? So let me clear out these functions. So function which is taking optional parameters, right? So how to define that function? First of all, so this function now is taking two arguments, right? It should be colon console.log, right? So here a comma b. Now what is happening over here is that this function can be called with this in this fashion, or it can be called with this fashion. So here see, the second argument b is actually optional. So what optional parameters means, that how do you define is that, so you can define a function which accepts optional parameters by mentioning the syntax question mark colon, right? So this syntax says that this argument may be undefined sometimes and this argument can be passed sometimes. So sometimes this is very much useful because you don't know you are going to pass the third argument or not, and based on that you can define this function. But be careful that when the optional argument is not passed, JavaScript by default assign it as undefined. So if I'm trying to send another argument like this, it is giving me an error, says expected 1 or 2 arguments but got 3. But in case when you are defined an optional parameter, JavaScript by default assigns b as an undefined, and if you don't pass any value, but if you're passing any value, that particular value is assigned to it, right? So let's say now I'm changing both of these to number. Okay, now let me say if b dot to fixed, right, b dot to fixed, let me change this, or 10 comma 20, and what I would say is b divided by 2 is equal to 0, then this is function is going to return something else, then return b, else return a. Right now, sometimes b can be undefined, sometimes b is not undefined. So what would be the output of this function? So see, it gave me an error. Type undefined is not assignable to type number. So here what's the problem is that when you make an object, when you define a parameter which is going to be optional, the type of that optional parameter is number union undefined. So first thing what it has tried to do here is that unable to compile, so that the compile time only it failed at the line number 3. It is saying object is possibly undefined. So this can be undefined. So here you have to explicitly check, and you need to be very careful when you are accessing default or when you are accessing optional parameter, because that value can be undefined and it cannot be identified during the compile time like this. So see here, you try to access a property, you try to perform some operation, but it is showing you some error saying that object is possibly undefined. So what technically the optional parameter mean is that this. So optional parameter means that it is assigning behind the scenes, it is assigning this type of type, this type, right, to the JavaScript engine, to the B. So that's one thing which you need to be very careful about. So here what you have to do is type of B is equal to number, then return B. Now it is functioning very well, because now the type of B can be either undefined or B, but the way you have written the code is pretty clear and it is already ignoring the undefined value. So only when B is defined and it is of type number, then only do something. So this is one thing which you need to be very clear about, that when you define an optional parameter, by default the TS engine is going to assign it as an undefined property, and if you try to perform some calculations on it, you need to be very careful about it. And now the second thing, that is default parameters. Right? So in the default parameters, when I do this, yes, so in both the cases it works perfectly fine, right? So it is not giving me any error. Either I put this, or this. In both the cases, the function is going to take 2 arguments. But what is the difference is that in the first case, that is in the optional parameters case, it is going to accept 2 arguments, and if you don't pass second argument, that value is considered to be undefined. And in default parameters, if the value is not passed, by default the number B, the number 100 is going to be assigned to be B. So the value of B inside the first execution, it is going to be 100, because it is the default value of that function. So if anybody forgets to send this second value, then you can assign a default value to it, so it will be automatically used. Now if I try to do this, so what does it mean? If nothing is passed to it, then assign undefined. So technically both this and null parameters to this are one and the same. So default parameters and optional parameters go hand in hand, but yeah, the difference is that in default parameters you assign a default value, and in optional parameters the default value is automatically assigned by the TypeScript engine, that is undefined. So this is one thing which you can be which will be very useful to you while you're working on TypeScript, right? And the second thing is, and the third thing is REST parameters, right? So this is one of the features of ES6. So A is string, B is string, and dot 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 C string array, or it can be any array. So what does this syntax say? So what does this syntax say is that REST parameters a comma string b comma 1 comma 2 comma 3. This is also right. This is also right. This is also right. So the REST parameters, as I mentioned in the beginning, REST parameters is that function or that functionality where you can define a function that can access infinite, that can take infinite number of arguments. Like here, if you console.log C in different cases, first we'll delete all of this. Yes, now let me execute the code. So see, in first case it is an array 1 2 3. In second case it is an empty array. In third case it is array with one string, that is C. So these are the REST parameters. So the syntax to write it is the spread operator, which is discussed in ES6 features video. So the spread operator, and I have assigned it type any. So if you have assigned this string, then it would have been problem. So numbers cannot be passed, right? So since if you want to accept any type of values as arguments after second argument onwards, so you just have to define it this way. Now C can be literally anything, and you can know it on the runtime, and you can figure it out the values of C on the runtime easily. So this is the usage of REST parameters. You just do triple dot and assign some value to it and what type it is. So this is one of the important feature which will be really handy to you. And the last thing is function overloading. What is function overloading, right? So in TypeScript, function overloading can be achieved by writing different function signatures or types. So it is not actually function overloading here we are doing. We are overriding the function signatures, and based on that TypeScript decides what we have to do, like this. Function random, right? A string, B a string, and this is going to return void, right? So this is one thing. Yeah, so we haven't defined the implementation yet. Random, A is string, then void, right? So here it says function overloading can be achieved by different function signatures or types, which we have just discussed, right? Now function, or I can simply say type is equal to right. So you can do this, or yeah, function random is equal to A comma B and return nothing, right? And then another function random A, this is going to return nothing. So this is not the way you write your function or achieve your function overloading over here, right? But how? It is something of this sort. So here the last argument is optional. So function overloading can be achieved in this fashion. So you make the other parameters optional and you will check if they are undefined or not, and that way you can implement the function like this. Right. So normal function overloading in any programming language, it looks like this. You define this and that, but how it is going to be achieved over here in JavaScript is that if you want to define a function of this type, then this is possible. Now this can be function overloading. Function random. Now it can take a number or string, so based on that particular function will be called. And yeah, so this is how function overloading can be achieved. It is achieved based on the types, not by the function definition. Okay, so this is one confusing thing in JavaScript which can be achieved. So basically this is called as function overloading only from, if you see it a broader perspective, but it has been achieved by defining the types and not by defining or implementing the function again and again like we do in other programming languages, which needs to be taken care in terms of JavaScript or TypeScript. Cool.